the Supreme Court heard oral arguments about whether Colorado could remove Donald Trump from their ballot in November based on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which states that any official who incited or gave comfort to insurrectionists...
Comfort me. Hold me. I'm going to storm the Capitol.
Insurrection against the United States bars them from holding office. Now, 6 officials have already been charged with this Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
Oh, shit.
5 of those individuals were former Confederate soldiers in the aftermath of the Civil War, which is when this was written, which was the whole point of having it written. Like, hey, when you do, when you try to overthrow the U.S. government,
there's rules.
You can't hold office. Now, apparently more people after the Civil War didn't even run for office because they knew that the 14th Amendment was going to come down on them. Right. So it was sort of a wash. And none of them were convicted. And this is important legally. None of them were actually convicted of insurrection. Like, they weren't labeled insurrectionists. They were, however, Confederate soldiers. So, if you're doing a little bit of the analogy, of course, is our 6th person who was barred from office for this very part of the Constitution. The analogy being January 6th insurrectionists. Remember Coy Griffin? He was wearing a massively large cowboy hat, telling everyone to descend on the Capitol. He was talking about he was a county commissioner from New Mexico, and he was barred from continuing. I believe he was either ousted from his post or barred from running again.
Wow.
He was charged. Get this, Matt. He was ultimately charged with trespassing, but he was acquitted of disorderly conduct. Now, I have been convicted of disorderly conduct, and for doing things like blocking a road for 15 minutes.
Right.
Literally any direct action or civil disobedience that you might partake in, that's what you could face is disorderly conduct charges. You guys know motherfuckers on January 6th didn't even get those. They got trespassing.
Damn.
Like, not all of them, but some of them. So that's just a sidebar. But
it's very annoying.
So that's sort of the background to all of this. Now, the Supreme Court justices, how did they discuss this? How did they face the different the arguments that were made before them? The lawyer for Trump, and then the lawyer for the state of Colorado, basically, and for these particular plaintiffs, I believe there's 6 of them who said we should be barring Donald Trump from our ballot. According to Elie Mystal of The Nation, he says that they went real easy on Trump's lawyer. Matter of fact, they were giving him different arguments, like trying to tee him up.
They're trying to help him.
Straight up. They were teeing him up for arguments that he didn't actually end up making. He was like, no, I don't need that. Here's what I'm going to say. But then he writes this. Elie Mystal says, it was only when Jason Murray, the lawyer representing the effort to keep Trump off the ballot, when he rose to argue that the justices really started tipping their hands. And that means showing that they ultimately, and what most analysts say, will rule that Colorado cannot remove Donald Trump from the ballot. Roberts, along with Justices Samuel Alito, alleged attempted rapist Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, all asked Murray why one state, Colorado, should be allowed to decide who gets to be on the ballot for essentially the rest of the country. So that was sort of when they started to change. And then he talks about
who should decide is a group of people, including 3 judges appointed by the very president who they're trying to bar.
100%.
That's more fair.
That is way more fair.
Thank you for fairness.
And then he talks about Ketanji Brown Jackson, and kind of how disappointed he was in her line of questioning and her arguments, and the same with Justice Kagan. Again, these are liberal justices and people who he was particularly disappointed with. He said that Ketanji Brown Jackson dug into the fact that the 14th Amendment doesn't specify that it applies to, quote, the presidency, the way it does other offices that insurrectionists cannot hold, and then seemed eager to invent a number of reasons for why that is so. I've read the same briefs as she has, and it would seem that she was unpersuaded by the overwhelming historical evidence that the writers of the 14th Amendment obviously didn't think that a president who engaged in insurrection could ever run for president again. Instead, she argued that the authors of the amendment were primarily concerned with preventing voters in the South from returning Confederates to office through local or state elections, and somehow just didn't care if they voted for a former rebel to be the president of the entire nation, which is so in the weeds, like tit for like it's the focusing on the minutia and finding the most technical excuse to say that of offices or officers, elected officers, do not apply to the presidency, which is total BS. Before I get to what Ellie said on Democracy Now!, I did want to say that the lawyer for the state of Colorado had a credible answer for basically, picking up on why Colorado should decide, potentially should decide at least for itself. Jason Murray said, had a credible answer for this one that usually wins in conservative circles: states' rights.
Love states' rights.
Murray said that Colorado had the right to determine its own election rules, and the Constitution grants near plenary power for states to determine their own election processes for federal officials. This is the point conservatives make constantly when they're defending the state right of states to say institute voter ID laws, close off early voting, or make any number of rules that restrict voting rights and limit voting access to poor people or people of color or reproductive rights. But here was Ellie Mistal sort of kind of laying into Ketanji Brown Jackson and the other liberal justices and ultimately saying, here's why these shook-ass justices will absolutely overrule Colorado Supreme Court.
Yeah. But yesterday, that intellectual consistency led her to what I think is a quite tortured place, where she was parsing the word office versus offices, officer versus offices, to try to find some way to not include President Trump. And the problem with that is that it's ridiculous. Right? It is just ridiculous as a matter of common sense to think that the people who said that you can't be a senator if you raised a rebellion against the government, and you can't be a congressperson if you raised a rebellion against the government, but president, yeah, sure, that's fine. We don't have a problem with. Like, that's a ridiculous argument. But that's what she talked herself into. And again, I think she talked herself into that. I think the liberals generally talked themselves into that because they don't like the political reality of what the law says. They don't like the idea of kicking Trump off the ballot. They don't like what that means kind of as a precedential value around the country. And so they twisted themselves into a pretzel to pretend that the law says something that it doesn't.
Right.
Which is like, I don't even know.
Terrifying. Actually terrifying.
Well, it's just like
terrifying.
What is even the impetus for this? Is it like, well, I'm just trying to be fair? Because like clearly that's not a logical argument. Like to be like, oh no, offices means like, yeah, you can be president if you do insurrection, but they meant everything else. Like why would they? I just don't understand it.
I don't either, especially when like. It's not like you got any, you're worried about job security.
Right. Yeah.
You effing appointed for life MFers. Like, truly, the fact that liberal justices, and we understand that all these conservative justices would never vote to remove Donald Trump from the ballot. Now, who knows if it were Joe Biden or a liberal running for president or whatnot.
Yeah.
But, like, again, and this is the same thing. This is but truly what it is, and this is what Ellie was saying, they don't want to set a precedent because they're afraid. Well, until Joe Biden leads an insurrection and storms the Capitol, right? Like, and again, they're all just afraid. They're like, well, if we hold them accountable for the egregious things they did, they might hold us accountable for some shit we didn't do. Like, it makes no sense to me. It is so terrifying to me that something that was written into the Constitution that was meant to protect the country against insurrectionists, secessionists, against violence, that this is, I mean, like, a constitutional amendment is not a fucking, like, this is a serious thing.
It takes a lot to pass a constitutional amendment.
And then you have what I think, I mean, and it all goes to the fact that Donald Trump and the right-wing movement in this country truly is a mushroom a spore that grew out of the unfinished business from the Civil War and the Reconstruction. These are all Confederates in present day.
It's like Last of Us. They're like clickers.
They're straight clickers, dude. And they have come back, and it's like, just because they're not, Robert E. Lee doesn't mean that they are not actual insurrectionists. And they, they absolutely, dabble in the language. And yes, they attempted to overturn an election on January 6th.
Yeah.
So I just I really like Ellie Mistal's take. I really think it's important that we understand that even these liberal appointed justices are still cowards. And it is also the reason, and this is, look, it's the reason that when Joe Biden says, I'm going to protect abortion rights, and that's why you should vote for me, a little bit of me doesn't believe him. Why? Well, because he hasn't talked about the filibuster.
Right.
If you don't get rid of the filibuster,
you're not going to get federal protections.
You can't get federal protections at all.
Yeah.
Right. If you can't do that, then and if you rest on your parliamentarian, on your bureaucrat every single time, if you rest on if we do that, if you do the cinema line, if we get rid of the filibuster, what are they gonna do to us? Ooh, well, they won't, motherfucker, because you will have codified reproductive rights, voting rights, and the right to form a union, and a million other things that you could get done if you just got rid of the filibuster. So it is terrifying to me that spineless bureaucrats run our country, because at some point you actually have to have morals.
Right. Yeah. And it's just like, it's one thing to be like making an argument about this is like, if someone wants to make the argument about whether or not it was an insurrection, it's like, okay, I get that. That's an argument that can be had. But to make the argument that the law does not apply to presidents is so tortured that you go what are you even for? Like it
feels like Ketanji Brown Jackson again. It's like
Girl,
the right hates you. They would. I mean, we're fighting a bunch of people who
This is why the Democratic Party is the fucking worst. It's the worst because, at least with the right wing, they have this they're evil. Don't get me wrong,
but they know that they know they're in an opposition. They know they're in a war.
They know they're in a war, and they have a plan, and they have infrastructure, and they have.
That's how they filled the Supreme Court.
Yes, that's how they got that. Imagine if we, on the left, had people who were just waiting in the wings to be the Supreme Court justices so we could all get free healthcare or whatever. Imagine any of the fucking, protections that we could be getting, for fucking, just imagine the social safety net in this country being even close to the standards set by European nations. We don't have that. Instead, what we have is milquetoast ass liberals and milquetoast ass liberal institutions and Democratic Party continuing this mushy fucking fight against
fascism,
rhetoric,
which is why but this is why, and this is the last thing I'll say, but I did want to just shout out the Surfs. Thank you so much for rating us. You're great. And Lance, I would like you on the show. I don't know how to get in touch with you. Thank you.
Yeah.
But this is why I will say, and we need to remember that progressives and leftists actually are more serious about fighting Donald Trump and MAGA and the right-wing ideology than any liberal. So don't let your anger and distaste for centrist Democrats who try to claim the mantle that they are the ones who fight fascism, that they are the ones who take Trump seriously. Don't let them gaslight you like that. Don't let them pretend, because they're not equipped to fight fascism. They don't take it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have anything to lose if and when we have a fascist government. They consistently try to, just listen to NPR, man. It's just the NPR. It's just like, nothing's wrong, everything's good.
Yeah.
Next we're gonna hear about chocolate designs from one of Trump's political prisoners.
I make them shaped like a swastika because it's a Hindu symbol, not because it's a Nazi one.
That's incredible.
Has some good ideas though. Eat my chocolate.
What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/bitchuationroom. Do